December 1941. The Pacific was burning. America had just entered the Second World War, and across thousands of miles of ocean, young soldiers were learning their first brutal lesson. Nature was just as deadly as the enemy. In the sweltering jungles of the Pacific, torrential rain hammered every camp. Tents tore apart, supplies rotted, weapons rusted overnight. Disease spread faster than gunfire. The U.S. military had a new crisis. It wasn't losing men to bombs, it was losing them to mud. They needed a shelter that could survive anything. Something soldiers could build without tools, ship across oceans, and still stand after a typhoon. A miracle of engineering, born from desperation. A miracle of engineering, born from desperation. And in a quiet corner of Rhode Island, that miracle began. By 1942, the United States was fighting a war like none before. From the frozen Aleutians to the jungles of Guadalcanal, every battle was thousands of miles from home, and every soldier needed a place to live, sleep, and heal. But there was one problem no general could solve. How do you build an army base in the middle of nowhere? Canvas tents were easy to carry, but in tropical rain, they turned into swamps. Wooden huts took too long to build, and termites devoured them within weeks. Concrete bunkers were strong, but impossible to transport across oceans. America was building a global war machine, but it had no roof. The logistics nightmare was staggering. Every new island captured had to be turned into an operational base. Hospitals, mess halls, machine shops, all from scratch. It wasn't just a military issue, it was survival. A shelter that failed could cost lives before a single bullet was fired. Commanders demanded a solution, something strong as steel, light enough to ship in crates, and simple enough that 5 men could assemble it with wrenches, not architects. So the Navy turned to its construction battalions, the Seabees, and a quiet request was made to a small group of engineers in Rhode Island. Their mission? Design a building the world had never seen before. The deadline? 2 months. The budget? Almost nothing. The stakes? The entire Pacific campaign. In a quiet naval base at Quonset Point, Rhode Island, a group of engineers stared at a blank sheet of paper. Their orders were simple and impossible. Design a shelter that could be shipped anywhere, survive everything, and built by anyone. The team belonged to the George A. Fuller Company, the same firm that once built skyscrapers in New York. Now their new challenge was not to reach the sky, but to give soldiers a roof. They tested everything: straight walls, wooden frames, pyramid shapes. Each design failed. Heavy, fragile, expensive. But then, one engineer, his name lost to history, drew a single curved line, an arch. A curve could distribute stress evenly. It could resist wind, carry weight, and require less material. The idea was ancient. The Romans used it for aqueducts, but no one had ever turned it into a portable house. They bent thin steel sheets into half circles, riveted them together, and attached lightweight ribs for strength. Within weeks, the first prototype stood tall, 16 feet wide, 36 feet long, curved like a half barrel. It looked strange, almost alien, but it worked. The structure took the full force of a coastal storm that night. The next morning, while tents lay shredded, the curved hut still stood, dry inside, solid, unmoved. They called it the Quonset Hut, named after the place it was born. By January 1942, the Navy approved production. The design was simple, modular, and brilliant. Steel ribs, corrugated panels, wooden floors, and ends that could be bolted or removed for ventilation. 5 men could build one in less than a day. Factories across the U.S. began to roar. Thousands of Quonset huts rolled off assembly lines in Ohio, New Jersey, and California. America had found its shelter. But now the true test awaited, the jungles and storms of the Pacific. In early 1942, the first shipments of Quonset huts left American shores. Each crate carried hundreds of steel ribs, curved panels, and a simple instruction booklet, barely 12 pages long. Destination: the unknown islands of the Pacific. The Seabees, the Navy's construction battalions, were the first to put them to the test. They'd never seen anything like it. A building without corners. But within hours, the curved ribs were bolted together, the sheets locked in place, and suddenly something stood where there had been only mud. The first one took 6 hours, the second just 4. By the third, the Seabees could assemble one blindfolded. They called them tin cans, barrels, even half-moons. But when the monsoon arrived, soldiers called them something else: home. For the first time, they had shelter that didn't leak, collapse, or crumble. Inside was light, dry air, safety in the middle of chaos, and the huts spread like wildfire. By mid-1943, over 30 major bases were built almost entirely out of Quonset huts. They became hospitals, workshops, chapels, even movie theaters. In one small island base, over 500 soldiers took shelter inside them during a typhoon, and every single hut stood firm. The curved design wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. Amid destruction, the shape of survival was a simple arch of steel. From the beaches of Guadalcanal to the frozen winds of Iceland, the Quonset hut became the quiet soldier of the war, one that never fired a bullet but saved countless lives. But America wasn't done yet. The design would evolve, larger, stronger, faster to build, turning a humble shelter into a global icon. By 1943, America had turned its miracle shelter into a mass production machine. Factories across the nation worked day and night: Cleveland, New Jersey, Los Angeles, all hammering out curved ribs and steel panels. Each Quonset hut came in pieces, packed tight in wooden crates, stamped with destination codes: Midway, Tarawa, Saipan. The system was genius in its simplicity. Every hut used standardized parts, a single bolt size, a universal rib shape. It didn't matter where the parts were made, they fit perfectly every time. America had industrialized survival. The Seabees could unload, unpack, and assemble a Quonset hut within hours. They built entire bases from scratch, rows upon rows of curved roofs glinting under the Pacific sun. Inside, there were barracks, mess halls, hospitals, machine shops, and chapels. Outside, life carried on: helicopters whirring, planes landing, soldiers training. For many, the Quonset hut became their only connection to normal life. It was where they laughed, healed, wrote letters, and waited for orders. It wasn't glamorous, but it was home. As the war expanded, so did the huts. New versions were introduced: larger spans, different shapes, faster assembly. By the end of 1944, more than 150,000 Quonset huts had been built. They stretched from the beaches of Normandy to the snows of Alaska. They stood through storms, earthquakes, and artillery blasts. Soldiers trusted them more than any bunker. When wounded men arrived from the front lines, they were treated under the curved ceilings of Quonset field hospitals. The same metal that shielded tools now shielded lives. The design was so effective that the British and Canadians copied it, creating their own versions like the Nissen hut and Romney hut, but none matched the speed and efficiency of the American original. By the war's final year, Quonset huts were everywhere, silent, shining symbols of American adaptability. And as peace finally approached, soldiers began to wonder what would happen to these curved steel homes when the war was over. No one realized it then, but the Quonset hut was about to start a second life, one that would last far beyond the war. When World War II ended, millions of men came home. But the Quonset huts stayed behind. Across the Pacific, in Europe, and even on American soil, thousands of curved steel shelters still stood strong.
The war was over, but these huts refused to die. The U.S. government now faced a new question. What do you do with over 170,000 metal buildings that no longer have a war to fight? The answer came from ordinary Americans. Farmers bought them for storage. Colleges turned them into classrooms and dorms. Families, desperate for housing in the post-war boom, turned them into homes.
For many veterans, living inside a Quonset hut felt familiar. The same curve that once sheltered them in war now protected their families in peace. Even great institutions used them. Harvard, Yale, and Stanford built entire temporary campuses using Quonset huts. They called them veterans' villages. For a generation rebuilding their lives, those curved roofs meant opportunity. But the story didn't end there. Architects began experimenting with the design, using Quonset structures for churches, theaters, and even stores. Some artists called it the architecture of democracy, affordable, practical, and built for everyone. In the decades that followed, the Quonset hut evolved again. Engineers used its shape for airplane hangars, sports arenas, and emergency housing. When NASA began building prototypes for lunar bases in the 1960s, they studied the same principle, the perfect strength of the curve. From the jungles of war to the laboratories of space, the Quonset hut's DNA traveled farther than its creators ever dreamed. And even today, 80 years later, thousands still stand, quietly, faithfully, reminders of an age when ingenuity built more than weapons, it built survival. They were never meant to last, just temporary shelters, steel, bolts, and paint. But sometimes the simplest things outlived the grandest plans. The Quonset hut wasn't just a structure. It was a witness to courage, to survival, to the quiet strength of those who built and lived within it. Born in war, forged in necessity, the Quonset hut reminds us that even in humanity's darkest hours, we find ways to build, to protect, and to hope.